assets have to be privatized. What is the way that these have to be valued? Now, in India, we have a very strange phenomenon, and perhaps it may be true in many of the other geographies, that we did not have a fixed asset register for the distribution company. No one knew what exactly are the assets, how much they have actually been depreciated, which have been replaced, repaired recently, and therefore an accurate valuation of the asset was a big challenge. In order not to get into the issue of either valuing them too high or too low, a concept of business valuation was adapted. And the easiest method to do was to check the revenue earning potential of the business as to how this business will pan out, how these assets will be able to sustain through an estimation process the revenue over a period of time, and then calculating the net present value through a discounting in terms of what therefore is a sustainable value considering the revenue growth and the revenue paradigm that we estimated. Now that gave us a very good estimation of the pragmatic value. Now it is important to do that, and it is important for stakeholders like government to understand how they will deal with the controversy that you're selling the family silver or you're selling the assets. Are you selling them too cheap, or are you making them too expensive for a regulator tomorrow to find? Means very difficult in terms of tariff fixation for the assets which have been artificially valued very high. So therefore, this revenue earning potential concept went a long way in terms of judging the right valuation for the assets. Now, this may be something that I'm sure is a factor which is being looked at even in the other geographies which are looking at reforming the distribution assets. Moving on, the other important aspect is how do you transfer a clean balance sheet? And I've seen some of the mechanisms adapted again in Nigerian reforms clearly have taken this input. And this is again a very important part to ensure success, because if you are doing reforms for the sake of ticking the box, or are you doing reforms to ensure that these succeed? If one has to ensure they succeed, you have to do some of these tough calls. You have to take these decisions in terms of ensuring that the business is transferred with the clean balance sheet. And by clean balance sheet, one means only put serviceable liabilities. Now take for example, somebody would say, look, I have receivables worth this many million US dollars. How do I include that in the transfer process? The simple answer is take them out. If they were to be collected, they were collectible, then somebody should have collected them by this time. But at the same time, don't write them off. Allow the new entities to collect them and get some percentage so that they can be incentivized to do their efforts to collect those past receivables. Now, these are the kind of concepts that have to be pragmatically built into the process of transition. If this is not done, then you're sure burdening the new setups, the new companies to pursue some of the old issues and therefore not look ahead. And I guess this is an important aspect that has been taken care of in many of the reforms. Look at the accurate baseline data. Now this is again one hell of an important issue for the simple reason that if the ground reality, the baseline data for losses, the baseline data for revenues, as also issues related to receivables, past liabilities is not accurately determined, you will have challenges. So therefore, how do you get independent third-party audits post-privatization to once again true up the baseline? Now that's been a learning that has been internalized in the Indian context. And I'm sure it is important, similar stuff to be done in the transition process to exercise prudence. We have talked about the past liabilities, and therefore that's one of the other important aspects. Also for success of the transition, it is important to look at equitable risk allocation. How are you making sure that not too much of risk is passed on to the entity, and at the same time, it's not that the risk is completely left to the customer side to be borne in terms of the tariff mechanism and causing tariff shocks or issues related to making the bulk part being sort of sourced irresponsibly. So various aspects that need to be done in terms of this transition is a whole lot of exercise, and I'm familiar with the fact that many of these aspects have been done very nicely even in the Nigerian context, and it will be important for the other countries to follow suit on some of these aspects as to how this is to be done. And the regulator has to recognize these risks for the reason that going forward, the regulatory orders year-on-year basis have to become predictable, and they have to therefore give some kind of commitment that they recognize many of these aspects. Also, it is important that on a going concern basis that we don't jerk the performance vis-a-vis the customers. Now, issues related to the existing ongoing contracts, issues related to the stores and spares, issues related to employee benefits, including their terminal benefits, and many of the employee dealings with the existing companies. Now, those are various aspects that need to be very clearly handled to ensure that the entire transition process is one which is predictable,
okay. Mr. Kumar,
the one which has the surety
Kumar,
of
if
success,
you can hear me,
and the one which is clearly, in terms of risk, palatable and equitable. And that is something
Mr.
in
Kumar,
which
if you can hear
the
me,
regulator
we
must
have just
put their
one
stamp
more
of
minute
approval.
for you.
Their tacit approval of the fact.
We have just a minute more for you, if you don't mind. So if you just round up.
You want me to roll back from where? From this slide?
I can't hear you. He's protesting. Okay, well, we have a finite time. We have another speaker who is ready to speak to us from the United States, Mr. Andrew Futch. And so we'll have to ask you to just take another minute or two to round up, and then we'll go across to the United States of America to hear from Mr. Futch. I'm sorry about that. Thank you very much.
Okay. I've been told that I should continue, and let me quickly expedite the balance part of the presentation.
Well, obviously, you can hear us a lot better than we can hear you.
The are the issues related to the government support, and I have mentioned about some of these aspects that the government support is important as to how one has to manage the whole process of the past issues and the new issues, because it moved from the government to the private sector. There are issues of ensuring that how will government participate in the loss reduction process. Now, in Indian context, very clearly people look for various enabling laws, very quickly looked at the possibilities of how government departments themselves will participate in the terms of ensuring recovery. So those are the various aspects that you need to make sure. There have to be policy directives that the government has to issue. There have to be other legislations and anti-theft aspects that have to be done. Now, some of these examples were clear participation of the government, and that did an amazing job in terms of providing police support, did an amazing job in terms of formation of special courts that were very quick and nimble in disposing of the cases. Now, having talked about some of the key cobwebs of this whole, cogwheels of this whole concept, the regulatory part, I said, is very important to this entire concept, particularly on a year-on-year basis, throwing up, and therefore I'm going to pass on this very quickly to get to the last section of change management as to how the entire change management process can be seen. Can you see that? No. How is the change management process of doing the performance-based regime can be worked through? This is an important part because I must mention by virtue of the fact that how the performance of the same workers, same people who were till yesterday managing the same utility, how could they be made more responsible, they could be made more competent. And that is where the incoming organization has to build competencies and work on various aspects of how things have to be done. Moving on to the change management, other aspects is the technological intervention. And I think one amazing piece that we could do by virtue of the technological changes and the IT intervention that we brought in, that made a wonderful transition from what we were to what we achieved. And you could imagine that we were, when we took over this enterprise, at about 53% aggregate technical and commercial losses. Today they are down to about 10%. And therefore, by virtue of that, we could achieve tremendous success by these processes.
Okay, so Mr. Kumar,
I guess I'm getting an indication that I need to quickly close this presentation, as the organizers want this process to be brought down. I just want to take you perhaps to the resultant last two slides to close this presentation in terms of how the journey was performed and in terms of how the entire process of change management was done. Several changes brought tremendous advantage to customers, but this shows it all in this slide, where in 10 years, if you see how losses moved from what actually was found to be 53% down to what is now less than 10%. And similarly, in terms of an amazing change that happened, that in terms of technological intervention, we got the Edison Award as a recognition of the best interventions. And in the IT side today, the customer doesn't move out of his house. Right from new connection to every aspect is done with the customer sitting at his own home. And even the new connection forms and even the new concepts of the approving the entire customer perspective is done at their home. So friends, there is a large antidote of how the transition takes place and how between the day that we took over to the day today, the entire transition process brought tremendous...
Mr. Kumar? Okay. So I think we'll just have to end it there. Thank you. Eric, we'll be very happy to hear your perspective on the issue, which, if I may say so again, is managing the transition from publicly controlled to privately managed power industries.
First of all, let me thank the organizers for this extremely timely subject. As the chair was mentioning, we are in a challenging transition period in our reform, and I think a lot of us here are asking, what's next? What are the issues that need to be dealt with? What are the solutions, and what are the lessons learned that we can take from elsewhere? And I think that His Excellency Mr. Seshaswili, as well as the experiences from India and elsewhere, are extremely pertinent in that context. However, I think the first thing I wanted to say is, although in Nigeria, I'm not sure patience is a national virtue. Everybody wants things yesterday. We have to apply some patience. I recall about 10 years ago a documentary called Power Trip about, I believe, an early stage in the Georgian reform made by a U.S. filmmaker. It ended relatively on a dark note, so to speak, with concessionaires being unhappy, with rampant theft and corruption, as was mentioned previously. And if you just saw that movie, you would think that the reform process would have been a complete failure. But here we are 10 years later, and we are counting this among the great success stories. So I think that long-term vision and staying true to the goals, which are not privatization, by the way, but improved service delivery, improved accountability, improved efficiency, an improved drive for the economy. These are the objectives we seek, and we need to keep those in mind. Part of this is to, I would call it, win back the confidence of the consumer. In Nigeria, we have long been too focused on addressing issues of revenue recovery, putting more megawatts on the grid, rather than addressing and informing the end consumer of actually what they can expect in terms of service levels. When are they getting their power cuts, and when are they getting powers? We still don't know. What are the rights and obligations? For a consumer to actually pay your bill, you also need to know what you can expect out of it. And I think these are areas which I know NERC is working very hard on, and the chairman is certainly one of them, to reinforce and re-emphasize the consumer rights and obligations in the very end of the value chain. The second part I wanted to mention in terms of transition is to look at the sustainability of the power sector value chain. No privatization is complete if it is dependent on recurrent government subsidies, which is currently the case. So we cannot count this reform as completed or successful until we have a sector that stands on its own 2 feet. And I think this is critical when we discuss what we call TEM, or Transition Electricity Market, but it goes beyond that. It goes to sanctity of contract, rights and obligations, the need to rapidly pay for power received in the distribution end, so those monies can be channeled up to generate more power generation. And as we look from the World Bank side at some of the first greenfield IPPs that we believe will close shortly within this current year, these issues are paramount. You cannot get major amounts of power delivered without having sufficient response from the consumers and the distribution end and the revenue channeled upstream. Finally, one thing that we observe from the World Bank is the need for government, donor partners, and development partners and other agencies in the sector to support the new operators in terms of facilitating the raising of finance. Even with all these aspects that I mentioned before, if the new operators and the new companies are not able to realize their turnaround plans, there will be very limited service improvement we can expect in the next year. So these are the things that we focus on. From the World Bank, we are bringing some modest instrument in terms of guarantees, in terms of investments in the remaining government parastatals to bear. But this is a collective effort, and I don't think any party in this can do it alone. So we from the World Bank side are ready and able to play our part in the process, and are for the long term and with patience, confidence on the success of this reform program going forward. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Eric. And I hope you in the audience are actually taking note of what he's saying. We have because of the circumstances, we are adopting a slightly different format. So we have panelists commenting on what they've heard so far, and then we'll go back to a speaker. So we're going back to Mr. Andrew Foch now in the United States. And if he's available, then we'll have the video. Somebody can stream the video down to us.
I'm going to make this quick. I'm not going to go through every one of these slides. I'm going to go through it fairly quickly. I want to give everyone an idea of who we are as a company within energy and utilities. Not everyone knows that IBM works in this space. We're in about 35 countries. And then I'm going to talk about our observations in the market in Nigeria. And then I'm going to talk about some global experiences that we have observed around the world when governments are attempting to essentially privatize and expand the capital available in their markets and make things more efficient, both from a technology standpoint, reliability standpoint, and a process and social equity standpoint. So those are the three things I'm going to present today, and I will go through them quickly. Slide 3, in case everyone is following. I want to talk a little bit about IBM's role in Nigeria. Of all the countries in Africa, we are the most committed to Nigeria as establishing our anchor base for global operations. You see a quote here from our CEO. I won't read it out loud, but you get the feeling of the sense that we are very much expanding in Nigeria. We've gone from approximately 10 employees to almost 5 times that amount in a very short period of time. So I just want to make everyone clear that we are heavily invested in Nigeria, and we are going to expand our presence there over time. And therefore, this is a long-term business opportunity and commitment from our company in the country of Nigeria. So I'm pleased to make sure that everyone knows that, and that's very clear to everyone in the audience. A little bit about IBM in the energy and utility space globally. This slide kind of represents a very small list of projects that we are involved in around the world. We are involved in approximately 35 countries. If you look at it from a meter standpoint, we are involved in approximately 100 million meters throughout the world. We are a system integrator. We do both meter data management, we do grid operations, we do business process, pretty much everything you can think of from a standpoint of making the grid more efficient, to be able to integrate renewable energy, to be able to get power plants to produce more energy, and financially to have a much better profile for the utilities and for the governments. Anything you can think of from supply, distribution, especially in the distribution space, we're involved in that. So I wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of the expanse and the scale of our presence in the energy space. We do not just sell products and solutions. I want to get away from talking about specific technologies. I'm not going to speak about technology today. We are involved in 3 major areas. We think of energy as a holistic thing. It's very crucial to society and to the economies around the world. We work on solutions and developments and technology, obviously. We work on policy and regulation, which is what I do, and I run that for the company. And then we also deal with industry thought leadership, which is essentially publishing our kind of view around the world on how to make things more efficient, more environmentally friendly, and more reliable, and what is the way in the business market process and the business market structures to make that happen. I want to talk about some observations that we have made in Nigeria so far. These are 3 questions I think that are very important as you guys are making the transition from a heavily regulated and nationalized energy system on the power distribution side to a much more private and open and capital investment intensive industry in order to improve your reliability in the system. One is, are all the folks and the stakeholders in the room, we're talking about government regulators, we're talking about the industry, the new privatized distribution companies, are you prepared to make these changes over the long run? This is not something that can happen overnight. So I think it's very important to think about the big picture and understand the length of time required to really make this transition. 2, there needs to be a very clear set of financial incentives and penalties for performance. I think you guys have gone a long ways down that path. So I think this is an area that things are going very well, relatively speaking. And 3, the most important, I think by far, what is the message to the people within Nigeria who are wanting to have more reliable and more affordable energy? And how does the investments that are being made by the new distribution utilities, how are those being articulated to the average person in Nigeria? Not to or within each other, because we all like to talk to each other, but to the people in Nigeria. How is that being articulated? These are 3 very important things to think about. Some of the things we see that are challenges within the utility companies in Nigeria is the rate and speed of data, the ability to actually finance this transformation, and to be able to fully electrify the entire country in a way that allows for revenue assurance and reducing non-technical losses. I'm sure we're all talking about this today, but this is some of the things that we've seen in the market. So finally, I want to go to my last section. I told you it would be fast. I want to talk a little bit about the experiences that we have seen when countries are attempting to privatize their distribution network, in particular distribution, not just generation or transmission, but the distribution side of the energy supply chain. So this is the most important slide. If I were to leave you with nothing else but just one thing, it would be this slide. There are definitely some best practices to make this efficient, to make it financially feasible, to be able to attract the capital necessary to make it happen. and to meet the expectations, frankly, of the people that are going to be consuming the energy and want to have a more efficient and reliable system. On the left side of the screen, you see the best practices, which are the following: a strong energy regulator that's willing to ultimately revoke licenses and have strong penalties and is willing to be consistent about performance for the utilities. You got to give sufficient and reasonable time for the new distribution utilities to actually create and operate a plan, to be able to finance it, and to be able to perform and show that they can perform. Without enough time, there can be sort of an unrealistic view about how quickly you can make this happen. So there needs to be a balance between the regulation and the ability for the energy utilities to be able to perform. A transparent and consistent communication between the government and the energy utilities, that's very important. And ultimately a clear message about when and where and how these investments are going to be made and how they're going to ultimately affect the consumer and improve their lives and their energy consumption. Some of the issues that we see very often as countries are going down this road are the reliability and financial incentives are changed very often according either to the election cycle or the government, or as a regulator begins to change their staffing. That can cause problems. Sometimes governments in other parts of the world overpromise on how quickly the improvements will be made. That can cause consumer pushback when the system is not performing better in the period of time that the government has said that it would. That can be a big problem. Insufficient data and trust between the regulator and the utilities. Pushback on new capital investments because it ultimately sometimes can increase the tariff, and so that's something that has to be dealt with. It's very sensitive and I understand very difficult to manage that. Or a general lack of political will to kind of see it through, because it can be very challenging to privatize the market. Not impossible, and it's a very good thing to do, but it is very challenging, and everybody needs to acknowledge that. So a couple of places that, and there's a long list, but I just wanted to point out a couple of countries where we have worked with clients and utilities and the government with regards to privatization. One is, of course, the United Kingdom, a highly deregulated and unbundled market. Some of the things that we've learned from what they've done is they've given a very long period for regulatory performance. It's about 8 years. They're very stable about their rate, and their profit penalty system is very clear, and everybody seems to understand it. And the utilities are pushing very hard on innovation in that area, despite some of the challenges that they've had with their smart meter rollouts and some other communications investments. Some of the lessons from the United Kingdom: they've been very clear about what the regulatory framework is that provides opportunity for utilities to profit, and they have allowed for major infrastructure investments that have shared benefits across the supply chain and been very clear about how it's going to benefit the consumer. So generally speaking, things are going relatively well in the United Kingdom. There are some issues, but they've been very transparent about what the goals are, and that has been very helpful to them. In Turkey, where I am currently, there's been a very significant privatization of the distribution system. There are now over 17 new distribution companies. I think it's up to 23 now. And the national regulator, which is the Energy Market Regulatory Authority, EMRA, has been working very closely with the new distribution utilities. I think the lesson learned from Turkey, even though it's not perfect and they're encountering struggles and challenges like everywhere else in the world, is that they've been very good at communicating between the utilities and the regulator about what the responsibilities are for each party and